Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, queer Black troublemaker and Black feminist love evangelist, and an aspirational cousin to all sentient beings. Her work in this lifetime is to facilitate infinite, unstoppable ancestral love and practice. Her poetic work, in response to the needs of her cherished communities, has held space for multitudes in mourning and movement. Dr. Gumbs' co-edited volume, Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines, has shifted the conversation on mothering, parenting, and queer transformation. She has transformed the scope of intellectual, creative, and oracular writing with her triptych of experimental works published by Duke University Press, including Spill, Scenes of Black Feminist Fugitivity in 2016, M Archive, After the End of the World in 2018, and Dub, Finding Ceremony in 2020. Unlike most academic texts, Alexis's work has inspired artists from across genres to create dance works, installation work, paintings, processionals, divination practices, operas, quilts, and more. She is the founder of Brilliance Remastered, an online network and series of retreats, an online intensive serving community accountable intellectuals and artists in the legacies of Audre Lorde's profound statement, and the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, that the preceding statement is only threatening to those who still think of the master's house as their only source of support. Through retreats on ancestor accountable intellectual practice and online courses on topics from anger as a resource to transnational intellectual solidarity, Alexis and her Brilliance Remastered collaborators have nurtured a community of thinkers and artists grounded in the resources that normative institutions ignore. All of Dr. Gumbs' work is grounded in a community-building ethic and would not be possible without her communities of accountability in Durham, North Carolina, the broader U.S. Southeast, and the Global South. As a co-founder member of Ubuntu, a woman of color survivor-led coalition to end gendered violence, Warrior Healers Organizing Trust and Earthseed Land Collective in Durham, North Carolina, a member of the First Visioning Council of Kindred Southern Healing Justice Network, and a participant in Southerners on New Ground, Allied Media Project, Black Women's Blueprint, and the International Black Youth Summit for more than a decade. She brings a passion for the issues that impact oppressed communities and an intimate knowledge of the resilience of movements led by Black, Indigenous, and working class women and queer people of color. Her writings in key movement periodicals such as Makeshift, Left Turn, The Abolitionist, Miss Magazine, and the collections Abolition Now, The Revolution Starts at Home, Dear Sister, and the Transformative Justice Reader have offered clarity and inspiration to generations of activists. Dr. Gumbs' work with her primary collaborator, Sangadar, has shown the world a queer Black feminist love ethic in practice. Over the past 11 years, they have nurtured the Mobile Homecoming Project, an experimental archive amplifying generations of Black LGBTQ brilliance, which has consisted of listening tours of the United States, 7 intergenerational retreats and pilgrimages in the Southeast United States, a media and audio archive of many Black feminist LGBTQ elders, and is now in the land stewardship phase of building a living library and archive that serves an all ages, independent, and assisted living community of intergenerational learning and love. Sangadar and Alexis are also the co-founders of the Black Feminist Film School, an initiative to screen, study, and produce films with a Black feminist ethic. They have also collaborated on the exhibition Breathing Back at the Carrick Gallery in Durham, North Carolina, and more than 50 visits to campuses, organizations, and conferences in the U.S. Dr. Gumbs was honored by the Anguilla Literary Festival as the Pride of Anguilla, a small country where her grandparents, Jeremiah and Lydia Gumbs, played key roles in the 1967 revolution. She identifies proudly as a queer Caribbean author and scholar in the tradition of Audre Lorde, June Jordan, M. Jackie Alexander, Dionne Brand, and many more. She was the first scholar to research in the papers of Audre Lorde at Spelman College, June Jordan at Harvard University, and Lucille Clifton at Emory University during her research for her PhD in English, African American Studies, and Women and Gender Studies from Duke University. She is published in dozens of edited collections and academic journals on topics ranging from Black coding practices to queer Caribbean poetics to mothering and hip-hop culture. She speaks as a Black feminist expert in a number of films, including Alice Walker, Beauty and Truth. Her poetry and fiction appears in many creative journals and has been honored with inclusion in Best American Experimental Writing, a Pushcart Prize nomination, and honors from the Lucille Clifton Poetry Prize and the Firefly Ridge Women of Color Award. She has been poet in residence in Makeshift Magazine and is currently creative writing editor at Feminist Studies. Her work as a media maker and her curricula for participatory digital education has been activated in 143 countries. Her digital distribution initiative, Broken Beautiful Press, Her work as co-founder of Quirky Black Girls and her loving participation in the Women of Color Bloggers Network in the early 2000s established her as one of the forerunners of the social media life of feminist critical and creative practices. Alexis has been honored with many awards from her communities of practice, including being lifted up on lists such as UTNE Readers 50 Visionary Transforming the World, The Advocates 40 Under 40, Go Magazine's 100 Women We Love, The Bitch 50 List, Color Lines 10 LGBTQ Leaders Transforming the South, Reproductive Justice Reality Checks, Sheroes, and more. She is the proud recipient of the Too Sexy for 5013C trophy, a Black Women's Blueprint Visionary Award, and the Barnard College Outstanding Youth Alumni Award. From 2017 to 2019, she served as the visiting Winton Chair at University of Minnesota, where she collaborated with Black feminist artists in the legacy of Lori Carlos to create collaborative performances based on her books Spill and M Archive. During that time, she served as dramaturg for the award-winning world premiere of Sharon Bridgeforth's That Black Mermaid Man Lady, directed by Ebony Noel Golden. She is the 2023 Wyndham Campbell Prize winner in poetry. Her book, Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals, won the 2022 Whitting Award in Nonfiction. In 2020 and 2021, she was the National Humanities Center Fellow, funded by the Founders Award, and is a 2022 National Endowment of the Arts Creative Writing Fellow. Her most recent book, Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, has been named a Publishers Weekly Top 10 Book of 2024, a Time Magazine Must Read of 2024, a Guardian Book of the Week, and was longlisted for the Carnegie Mellon Medal in Nonfiction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. We are very excited to have Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs on the podcast today. Thank you so much for making time and being here. How are you?
I'm so honored to be here. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Thank you again so much. So we can dive right in. We like to start with asking about how you came to the field of Black Studies and what keeps you committed to Black Studies as a field.
Yeah. I came to the field of Black Studies really because of my parents and their reading practices and the way that they were supplementing my education. I often talk about how, they got me Nikki Giovanni's Poems for Children, Sonia Sanchez's Poems for Children, Pan-Africanism for Beginners, Black Panthers for Beginners, Malcolm X for Beginners, right? So I didn't know that was called Black Studies. I just thought it was important to know our history as a people, and my parents always demonstrated that. And, I am a Black feminist literary scholar, and it really was always having the works of Angela Davis and Ntozake Shange and Alice Walker visible in our home that was part of how that became who I am. What keeps me committed to the field of Black Studies, and field is a beautiful word that I think about it with how June Jordan describes Fannie Lou Hamer, one full Black lily in a homemade field of love. And the field of Black Studies for me is that generative site of our growth. What do we need to know? What do we need to ask to continue this practice of love? And it's certainly loving each other as Black communities, but it's also in alignment with the truth that the Combahee River Collective offers us. If Black women were to be free, everyone else would necessarily have to be free, because our freedom requires the destruction of all systems of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And so Black Studies as a field, I think, is accountable to that growth, that form of growth into our total freedom, which ultimately includes and benefits everyone.
Thank you. I think it's really, it's an important reminder, right? That getting Black women free frees everybody.
Yeah.
And too often we don't necessarily, broader society doesn't necessarily focus on freeing Black women or understanding the impact that Black women have on every aspect of everything. So,
every aspect, yes.
Yeah. And I think particularly in this moment, there's a lot that can be said about the impact of and on Black women of the things that are happening, in a way that we should really be looking to and learning from, which I think is really apparent through your work on Audre Lorde, your new book.
We have so much to learn, yes.
Yes. Yes. But even the title, like Survival is a Promise, that's such an affirming way to frame Black feminist women's lives and journey and impact on the world around us. Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be gained, obviously, from the book, but just in listening to Black women in general.
That's right. Yes. I mean, I think the project of Black feminism, even before the words Black feminism emerged, really has been about livability, how to
Mhm.
create a life-giving context for our communities and everyone we love. And that is what we need, right? I think that it's not just an oversight that the contributions of Black women have been erased and ignored and gone uncredited when they've been
Mhm.
transubstantiated and incorporated into other people's theoretical work. I have things to say about that, but it's not just an oversight. It is an actual act of sabotage
Mhm.
by people who understand their current privilege as being based on ignoring that possible, inclusive, livable world. And through that, they're sabotaging their own freedom. And, Toni Morrison and her son wrote about, right? Some people are afraid of their freedom. And I think that the freedom of all people comes into view again and again in the manifestation of Black feminism. And that's why it's so terrifying. But of course, that's why it's so important and so crucial. And I'm really committed to everyone having access to that possibility, that promise of survival.
Thank you. All of that not only is important to remember in this moment, but really speaks to the importance of, like you said, like the words Black feminism. Like, there were Black feminists before that was a word, and they were
Mm.
doing this work
That's
and honoring those contributions and not erasing them or ignoring them or denying their impact is so important. And I there's a simultaneous like hopefulness because I think that is being recognized more, but it's also sad because it's like how much further could we be along if we had taken seriously and not tried to erase the lessons that so many generations of Black women have taught us.
Exactly. Exactly. And, I like to believe that it's not too late, but when we look at the environmental reality, when we look at the climate crisis, when we look at the overt fascism that we're facing at this time, I feel that way too. Like if everyone had just listened, we we could be living in a totally different way and in so much more alignment with life itself.
Yeah. That is one thing that very much strikes me and is so interesting and important about your work in general is the connection that you make to nature and to climate and to elements of the non-man-made or human-controlled world, I think, which is another important reminder that like we're all operating within this ecosystem together
Right.
and our continual destruction of it is not going to bode well for any of us.
It's self-harm. It's explicit self-harm. Yeah, and harm to our future generations. And I think it's really crucial because it's not, I mean, I appreciate you acknowledging me for making those connections, but it's almost the inverse, because like we, in fact, as you just said, are inherently connected to all of life. And when we say that, it's pushing back against this systematized denial of that
Mhm.
interconnection, right? And that's how colonialism functions, to isolate us out of our context, of course, to our collective detriment. So it's and this is something that has also been part of this long Black feminist tradition, right?
Mhm.
This is why June Jordan's writing about plants all the time. Audre Lorde's writing about geology and the earth all the time. Why Harriet Tubman is an herbalist. Why, I mean, I can just continue to name examples. Black feminist practice has always been drawing those connections, and I understand why, and I'm also committed to reminding us of those connections.
Well, thank you for your reminders. Uh, I think that they're very important and necessary at if anything is going to shift, if we're going to actually take seriously the situation that we're in, but also the lessons that have been provided to us to survive them. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
so how would you situate yourself in relationship to disciplines? You have poetry, you have literature, you do also invoke and talk a lot about nature. Although I don't know if you would consider yourself to be like in a discipline related to nature necessarily, but how do you see your work as moving between these areas or just encompassing them in totality?
Yeah, that's such a great question. My parents can tell you I grew up with a resistance to all forms of discipline. And in my intellectual life, it's and to me this follows, what can I say? Black feminism is my discipline. It is my rigor. It is my accountability. It is my spiritual practice. And Black feminism is inherently a practice of interconnection, right? Always drawing these interconnections, naming itself out of the fact that, we're not one identity one at a time. We're not involved in one movement as if it's separate from all others. We're not confronting any system of oppression as if it's not interlocking
Mhm.
with other major systems of oppression. And so what that means for my intellectual practice is that I have to be rigorous in getting out of my own way. I have to be rigorous in noticing internalized binaries and segregations that I have made
Mhm.
that are residue of my own colonial and colonizing education, and being like, oh wait, like, well, yeah, I want to listen to my ancestors, and then realizing like, oh, but that's not only within a human species, like some of the assumptions that I have made coming out of the colonized structure of my education, a very privileged access to education that I have had. I'm in a process of unlearning those in the service of the Black feminist ethic that says it's always about connection. And wherever I am perceiving disconnection, I have to learn what is the connection, right? That's
Mhm.
that's my continued learning. So what that means in terms of disciplinary fields, in the way that we would talk about them in terms of Black study and things like departments and the actual structure of academia, definitely means that I see the relevance everywhere. I see
Mhm.
the relevance to this Black feminist practice everywhere. I think about Barnard graduate revolutionary Grace Lee Boggs, who talked about education. Like, if we could really figure out the things that are facing us,
Mhm.
clean water, how to be together, how to live here together, right? Which is, again, the Black feminist question. That requires every single form of learning. It requires all the life sciences. It requires all the poetry. It requires all the planning. It requires all of our history. All of those
Mhm.
things are required. And, I think that it's like we can evolve from where we are. I think Black studies obviously is already an interdisciplinary field. It was founded as an interdisciplinary field by elders and ancestors who were asking the question, what do our movements need? What do our people need to know? What does it mean for us to reclaim knowledge and nurture an intergenerational inquiry into Black freedom, right? Those are the founding questions of Black studies, of which Audre Lorde was one of those founding figures
Mhm.
of Black studies, Sonia Sanchez, so many other people. And at this point, I think that it's important to remember that, because the institutionalization of Black studies is has it positioned to potentially try to conform to the colonizing segregations of the university. But actually, its imperative is to do that thing Grace Lee Boggs was talking about, which is to say, it's always a question of what do we need to know. And it operates on a collective scale as an ecology in community, which means I don't have to know all of those things personally.
Mhm.
I have to be willing to learn from all of that, but I don't have to hold all of that. And maybe, my own, if I want to really focus, if I want to really focus on the marine mammals, I want to really focus on these particular poets, that focus is most useful in a broader ecology of my community of
Mhm.
thinkers and questioners and co-teachers, right? We're teaching each other. So that's the way I think about discipline, relationship to discipline, is that we transcend it in a particular way, but we also need all of it. And it's a reminder of how much we need each other. That our focus and our specialization is not to silo us off, but our focus and our specialization is to provide depth to each other in community.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I think about all of the conversations, right, that have been had around Black studies and what it encompasses, and its infinite possibility for including and having those voices and drawing on the collective, but then or the ways in which it is situated or put into an institutional framework that then serves to once again re-isolate, because that's what the institution of a higher education does. And then how that's as we're seeing, potentially very detrimental for the ways in which it has been formed in higher education in particular spaces. And there's so much that is going to need to be revisited in terms of the past and in terms of the founders and how they imagined this operating, because the institution is not necessarily going to have the field of Black studies formally in it.
Mm-hmm.
But Black studies is not confined to the institution, or, doesn't have to have the institution to exist. It's going to exist regardless.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to ensure that we have an understanding about the collective nature and the importance of the collective on maintaining it when these structures that we have allowed to be built around it dismantle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we have to remember, I'm so grateful for this podcast about the past and future of Black studies, right? It's so important to remember that before, like W.E.B. Du Bois was not a person who had access to a tenure track position at a Research One university, even though he was Du Bois, he's a if anyone's a scholar, right? Anna Julia Cooper, who I was meditating with a collage of Anna Julia Cooper this morning, like their doctorates were not in order for them to be able to assimilate into these existing institutions. They were practicums for them to create counter institutions and transform public school institutions. And in the case of Anna Julia Cooper, have in her living room a school where formerly enslaved elders could learn to read. He's answering these questions of like, what do we need? And this is why Ida B. Wells was so committed to Black institution building, intergenerational institution building, transnational institution building, right? And so when we look at these figures, it's not just, obviously we have a commitment to teach people about these people, right? That's part of our Black studies imperative. But we also, I think, have an imperative to be transformed by the actual form of their study, the ways that they actually applied their Black intellectual work. And that was mostly not to assimilate into institutions that existed. It was mostly to create institutions that our communities needed for our movements.
Thank you. Building on that, how do you see your work as a teacher, your pedagogy? How do you see that as being informed by Black studies, or, more specifically, Black feminist studies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is, and so, of course, as I said, learning from, I have had schools in my living room, like Anna Julia Cooper, right? I look at Alexis DeVoe and Gwendolyn Hardwick, who they called on the Black study legacy of the salons, right? And they had salons in their living room in Brooklyn, as the Nardal sisters in the Negritude movement had salons, as Harlem Renaissance artists had salons. And so thinking about the living room as a space of education was my first move, and obviously the space I had easiest access to because it's literally my living room. That legacy of understanding what can happen at home with all those examples that I offered at the kitchen table, right? Thinking about the intellectual intervention of Kitchen Table Press, saying this is something that we can create in order to have our transnational feminists of color conversations become intergenerational, which they did achieve, because this is why you and I are familiar with, but some of us are brave, and This Bridge Called My Back, and so many homegirls, so many important texts. Why the Combahee River Collective statement is an intergenerational guide for Black feminist study and practice. And so So all that is to say, we thinking about Audre Lorde and Pat Parker and the workshops that they did in prisons, thinking about June Jordan and her creation of Poetry for the People, inclusion of high school poets as instructors, and just this expansion of learning that I have seen as I've studied what Black women's intellectual work has been. And all those examples are just in the United States, right? So that's
Mhm.
like not even bringing in Sistren and what the women in Jamaica were doing, all Erna Broadburr and the emancipation schools that she has to this day have really shown me that this expansiveness, a pedagogical expansiveness of what it means to create educational space by the same ethos that we were talking about before, right? Understanding that it should be multi-generational. It should include people who have different institutional experiences, right?
Mhm.
Including prisoners, for example, including people who are houseless, for example. All of these ways that these practices have been inclusive guides me. So what does that mean? That means I'm a everywhere all the time type of teacher, right? And some of that's in the lineage of my own, like, as you can tell right now, not concise, very verbose family that I'm a part of. And I will talk to you on the bus, on the airplane, in the middle of the street, and be like, did you know Audre Lorde said, I'm just always ready. It's that evangelizing energy. I stay ready to tell the good news of Black feminism. And structurally, it's meant creating counter and micro institutions and collaborating with a wide range of arts, educational, and activist institutions in order to facilitate workshops and hold space for people to learn about the Black feminist tradition. In terms of our own work with Mobile Homecoming and with Eternal Summer of the Black Feminist Mind, it has been in our living room and other people's living rooms. And in recent years, certainly impacted by the pandemic and other factors, it's been a lot of online work to create
Mhm.
gathering spaces that people can access from wherever they are. And that's been it's been powerful. It's been affirming to see people who are invested in and committed to the practice of Black study. And it's not because they're getting a certain amount of credits for it. It's
Mhm.
not because they're required to be there for their job. It's because they actually value the transformational impact of learning about Black feminism through, in our case, especially Black feminist literary work for their lives, for their communities, for their families. And I think it's important. It's important for me to say that here. It's a blessing that you asked that question here, because I want other people who are committed to the field of Black studies to understand that
Mhm.
when Audre Lorde said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, the next thing she said is that is only a problem for those who still define the master's house as their only source of support. And I think especially right now, because of the direct attempt to erase Black studies, the very targeted attack of not only Black studies, but
Mhm.
all of all of our fields of study that came out of movement. This is a very scary time for people who maybe intellectually don't, but like in their bodies feel that the university is actually the only place where Black study can happen rigorously. And it's not, and it never has been. And as I just said, our ancestors demonstrated that very clearly. And I feel that it's important to lift up our practice as an example that shows that communities want this. It's not only through the university that they want to access this conversation. I mean, I'm wearing a hoodie from the Free Black Women's Library, another institution of
Mhm.
constant learning that is not affiliated with the university, but just shows this huge love, demand, and rigor to be a part of this conversation. And I think that people need to know that. And the reason I know that in my body is because I'm practicing it. And I'm an independent scholar whose scholarship is supported by communities who invest in me being able to have this practice space and
Mhm.
learning about these ancestors through what we create. And of course, collaborators, right? Collaborators who are like, our organization wants to bring you to speak at our conference. Collaborators who are like, well, our academic unit wants to support you in this way, right? But I think that we're evolving into more forms of support, and I want people to know that it's already there. It's not like what we need to build to replace the colonizing institution. We're going to have to build it from scratch. It's actually something that has been here a very long time, and it also exists now.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question, or yes, ask you to build on that a little bit, because one of the things that struck me in Survival is Promise, right, is the role that libraries played in Audre Lorde's life, but also the role that anticipating the necessity of her life being archived.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like she kept those things. She knew that at some point we would need to be able to look back at these elements of her life in a way that it's really impressive, but also just the prophetic nature of that. Like, no, what I'm doing is important. Even if I don't understand how important it is right now, I know that someday somebody's going to see and understand the importance of what I have done. So how do you think about, or how do you think we should all be thinking about how we engage with archives and libraries in order to unearth or recenter the Black feminist work that we all need right now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Audre Lorde testifies that her life was saved by children's librarian Augusta
Mhm.
Baker, which, I write about it at length in Survival is a Promise. And she became a librarian because she saw that, what did it mean for her to be in the Harlem branch of the New York Public Library, which became the Schomburg Center, which is
Mhm.
celebrating its centennial this year. What did it mean to have access to that collection that Arturo Schomburg created and founded, and then the lineage of librarians who have stewarded that? So Audre Lorde was thinking in that way. She did her master's work in library service, which is now library science at Columbia, as a student activist, by the way, during the McCarthy era. And she is somebody who, as a alum of Barnard and Columbia myself, I'm really drawing on that energy, and I'm very proud of the current students, recent students who are part of that lineage. We are part of a
Mhm.
lineage with Audre Lorde, and my love for them is profound. But even that, like, I don't necessarily know that Mahmoud Khalil, who has been kidnapped by ICE, knows that Audre Lorde was also a graduate student at Columbia, who was a
Mhm.
student activist. Like, we need to know these things, and it strengthens us when we understand that we're not isolated, especially when we're being targeted and isolated. Students are having their degrees revoked, right? All of these punitive things that are happening. And to know that, Audre Lorde was suspended for activism. Audre Lorde faced this. June Jordan faced this. Like, all of these people coming out of these hostile institutions that are still hostile in this very moment. All that is to say, Audre Lorde was very clear because she suffered and struggled, feeling like she was the first person of her kind.
Mhm.
She felt like she never heard of any other Black lesbian poet. And she didn't feel like future generations should have to feel like there was no one before them. She eventually understood, like, oh, there was Angelina Weld Grimke. There was, through the ongoing project of Black feminist unearthing that you mentioned, she then learned, oh, I never was alone, but I thought that I was. And so her understanding of her own archive and her own literary record keeping was to say, I don't want anyone to feel that way. I don't want anyone to feel like they are alone when they actually are part of a long and loving project
Mhm.
that they get to welcome themselves into, because it makes all the difference. For me, understanding that I am a part of a Black feminist lineage that, as we said, goes back before to the words Black feminism, it changes everything in my relationship to myself, my action, my possibilities, my decision.
Mhm.
I feel so resourced in that context. And Audre Lorde wanted people to feel that way. And that is, I feel like, the work that I'm taking up in this new biography of her is to also provide access, like, for people to be like, okay, so you may have heard of Audre Lorde, Black lesbian feminist warrior poet, but did you know she was a librarian, an activist librarian? Did you know that she was an activist graduate student? Did you know that she went through this? She fled the country during McCarthyism because of the targeting and the, like, to understand that in all of this, where we're supposed to feel isolated and attacked, when students are being directly betrayed by the institutions that they're affiliated, when faculty are being directly betrayed and targeted by the institutions they're affiliated with, that could make you feel totally bereft because you've invested your life in this affiliation. You're not, because you're part of an older project, a braver project, a more substantial project. And Audre Lorde's life is an example of that. She wanted to be a resource for future generations. She explicitly said, my words will be there. That was her commitment. And of course, it intersected with the commitment that Janetta Cole and Beverly Guy Sheftall had when they founded this Black women writers focus at Spelman College, which Audre Lorde's collection is really the founding collection of. And as you know, Toni Cade Bambara's work is also there. And Gloria Joseph's work is now there. And Angela Bowen's work is the newest collection there. She's the first person to write a dissertation about Audre Lorde. So anyway, it's a beautiful collective project, but it absolutely for Audre Lorde came out of her understanding of what it meant not to have those precedents and reference to strengthen her when she needed them.
So trying to think of the way that I want to word. Because one of the things in the portion where you talk about going to the archive at Spelman, and that, initially it wasn't necessarily cataloged in a way that was clear or put it into the context of her other work. And there was a disconnect between drafts of things, but also, and then the finished product and making those connections. Do you have suggestions, or how should we be, or how can we support being more intentional about not just taking Black women and Black women's voices in writings seriously and elevating it and making sure that their contributions are not erased, but seeing those connections and going back to the interconnectedness of Black feminism as an ethic, right? Like, how do we ensure that these connections are made?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just need a deeper investment in our own archives and in our own institutions that can hold these works sacred. I mean, the reality is that Audre Lorde's manuscript collection is massive because she kept everything. And that's great news, especially, for someone like me who researches about Audre Lorde. And the reality also is that the staff at the time of the Spelman archives was like one person, So, and I've learned even more since from Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall about like all the people who helped and like what it went to even be able to have those archives be accessible at all. And then the external grant for it to have to be, in a certain way, cataloged by an offsite location that was not at a Black feminist institution like the Center for Research and Resource Center for Women at Spelman that Beverly Guy Sheftall founded. So it's not for lack of wanting to make the connections, It really is a money thing. It really is a money thing. And, I mentioned in the book the contrast because I was doing simultaneous research for my dissertation on Audre Lorde and June Jordan, and June Jordan's work, which is at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, what they have in terms of staff and resources, it's so much more. And what is the source of that? Well, it's the interest based on their involvement in an enslaving economy. And that is a contradiction, right? So I think I just want to make it clear that I don't think that there is any lack of Black feminist interconnected desire, in the struggle to bring Audre Lorde's papers into the public as soon as possible. I just know that we deserve so much more than we have, and we have also created what everyone else has, like it's a reparations question, honestly. So what would help reparations? That's a one word answer, but also our valuing and our investment collectively. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to police what we as, let's say, Black scholars or Black feminist scholars spend our money on, but I'm just saying that we could together. I'm not an economist. I don't have the number in my head of how much is it that Black women spend, in a given year. But I know that it's a lot because I know that whole industries depend on it, and
Yeah.
entire economies base their understanding on the spending power of just Black women, which is not everybody who I'm talking about in terms of being accountable for this and what it would mean to invest in something like archiving our histories. Even the time of participating in that archiving work, like with our own
Mhm.
elders. I'm a person who like records my aunties and my grandmothers and and is the person in the family that everyone sends the stuff to, like, oh, I found some more old pictures. I know you'll hold them. Even that, investment of our time and understanding that we are creating a context and we are engendering possibility when we make those connections, and our care for those artifacts allows more connections to be made beyond even what we'll be able to imagine in our lifetimes.
That was a really important reminder about like the creation of your own familial archives or the archives of the community that in which you operate, and the importance of having that alongside the archives of women and scholars that have become guiding stars
Mhm.
to the work that is done. But there's also, like, in addition to the erasure of the voices and the contributions of more prominent Black feminists, there's the erasure of the everyday Black feminist, right?
Right.
The person who never got to publish something formally, and having that information, I think, is also, as you said, it's super important. And I think it goes back to what you said about the lesson from the founders of the field. And like, it's not about going into the institutions, it's about building our own institutions and thinking about what is important and what is needed, and taking the knowledge and the resources that we're able to from over there and bringing them over here to make sure that our communities have what they need to continue going.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, 2 questions left. So and you've touched on this, so if you feel free to be like, I feel like I covered that. Um, but what interests you most about the past of Black studies?
Yeah, obviously, I'm so interested. I mean, everything. I feel like I just have new questions every day. Literally right before I got on here, I was like, what are the different fruits that that people might remember, like that my ancestors might have remembered from before the Middle Passage, that are not part of what their food systems were here? And what if they were having dreams about that? Like I'm just endlessly interested in the past. But yeah, as I said, I'm particularly excited about what all different types of Black thinkers have created out of their love for our people and their love for freedom. I'm really interested in that because those are guideposts for
Mhm.
us who are all types of, and I'm saying everybody, DJs, everybody who sees themselves as passionate about artifacts of Black creativity. What do we do with that? What do we create from that? I think we have so many examples, and there's always more. And there are many that will remain unnamed that I'm also committed to still listening to them and imagining them. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what we've done with our love, because it becomes communion, for what we can do
Mhm.
now.
So building on that, which might be very similar to what you just said, but what interests and excites you about the future of Black studies? Or maybe where should we go or continue going with the field moving forward?
Yeah, I see so much love. I see so much love. I see so much love and solidarity with transnational movements. That's exciting to me. I see so much inclusivity, and creativity about being together across all sorts of differences. I'm really excited about everything. Yesterday I was on a panel. Loretta Ross convened this reproductive justice futurism think tank, and I was on a panel with, like, sometimes when you're dealing with elders, they're like the young people, and I'm like, some of these people are a lot younger than me, but but I was on like the last panel along with like Loretta Ross's students who just graduated from Smith like just now, and we were talking about the future, and it was really beautiful to see them talking about like how they're engaging every form of media, how they are critical of the institutions that they're part of, how they're bringing what they've learned in a Black feminist educational space like Loretta Ross's classroom to their work in the nursing field, to their work in as teachers in public high schools. Like it's just really beautiful to see folks applying the work. And it feels really great. And I want us to have more of this spaces to see that, spaces to see like we might know what is on a lot of Black studies syllabi. And of course, Barbara Smith, Patricia Bell Scott, and Akasha Gloria Hull modeled that for us by collecting those first Black women's studies syllabi. But some of us are brave. But we don't sometimes know that it's like people are doing all kinds of things. They're like, oh, well, I just decided to run a Black women's surfing club, and we read your book. Those interconnections are really exciting to me, and I'm getting to see that from the ways that people are using this biography of Audre Lorde, from the ways that people are using earlier works that I've made in this tradition, out of the inspiration of Black feminist scholars, and to see that there really are infinite uses and people are bringing it with them everywhere they go. I'm really excited about that.
Well, I mean, I think that when you make the interconnectedness so visible, it allows everyone to have a space to enter and to see the applicability. So I think you do an amazing job of that. And obviously, like, you're known for it. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, but look what you did. You just brought it full circle back to Anna Julia Cooper. You said when and where I enter, right? I love that. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Space for everyone to enter.
So, is there anything else you would like to add or mention or highlight?
No, I think we keep it there. I think we keep it there because you just brought it full circle in such a beautiful way. So, Anna Julia Cooper said, the world needs to hear her voice. You're absolutely doing that with this podcast and with your broader work. And I'm really, really, really proud to be a part of what you're creating.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here, having your insight and reflections, both through the book, but also on the podcast is truly an honor. Thank you so, so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.